Today it's about altering a standard RDD. So this is with those canned reports in Epicor Kinetic. There are usually RDDs that are attached to those that pull your data in. They're kind of like a SQL statement. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to change a standard report data definition, and we're going to go through, in terms of creating a report style, that's kind of the first step in an RDD and why you would need to create an RDD. It's a little bit of different steps if you're doing a BAQ, which also is something that she is handling. I'm doing more just a standard. First, you'll have to create the report style, and then you'd have to create a copy of the canned RDD, link it to the report style, and then we're going to talk about adding a field to an RDD and adding a table to an RDD and what is involved in that. Now, I have a lot of slides today because this is kind of a meaty topic, so I'll try and go as fast as I can, and then you can reference the video later. Okay, so let's talk about creating a copy of an RDD. To do this, all you're going to do is, we're going to play the video. So this is your report styles, and we had already created a new report style, and there is the report data definition, which is the data that, so we're going to go into our report data definition. That's the data that's connected to it, going to the Kinetic version. And then from the report data definition menu item, we're going to take this canned one and we're just going to make a copy of it. So you just go duplicate report. You can name it whatever you want. That's fine. I'm changing that name. And once again, this is essentially like the SQL statement that's connected to the canned report. Okay, so that's how you duplicate. Oh, it's taking a second to think. And then eventually it'll pop up on the screen with my new name. So that's going to be the name of your new RDD. Okay, let's go to the next thing. So now we're going to add our new RDD to our report style. So we just created a new one, and we need to connect it to our report style that's connected to our RDL, which is here, right here. And in order to do that, you have to go back to your report styles. So that's in here. You have to pick your specific report style and you change it. And I'll show you how you do that in a second here. And it's best to name it, change the name after, because then it'll stay easily sortable in your list and you'll know any report data definitions that exist for customer statements. So any variants of that customer statement report data definition will be in that list. So as you can see, I did customer statement and then my unique name went after. Now let's talk about adding an actual field to that statement, that essentially that SQL statement, that report data definition. You're going to have to do it in a certain process. First, you're going to have to add the field to the RDD by unexcluding it, which we'll show you. And then only for non-Epicor users, these are certain steps that help you with testing. But if you're a cloud user, you're going to have to do the process of downloading, adjusting, and then re-uploading and testing through your report style, which is the traditional process when you have to edit a report. But this is for non-cloud users, non-Epicor cloud. And then in this, we're going to talk about adding the field to the actual RDL, so the SSRS report, in three places, which is the query expression, the query fields, and then the report itself. And so we have slides for each of those to go through and talk about it. So let's talk about adding it to the RDD itself first. We're going to play this video. You'll have to go to data sources. That's going to be all your tables. So, and it says report table once you get to data sources. And you're going to look through, find what table you want to pull your field from. In this case, it's company. Exclusions are all the fields that are connected to that table. Now you can see this column, exclude label. So I'm saying, hey, I actually want address 1, 2, and 3. Don't exclude it. Let's unclick the exclude so that we can use it on our report. And then we say save. Excellent. And that's all you have to do for that. Just make sure you save it. Now these parts are only really for non-Epicor cloud users, because we're going to use GUIDs to test. GUIDs help us test our report, make changes, make sure that we're making the right changes, and test constantly. You won't have access to this if you are a cloud customer, and because you don't have direct access to the SQL server. So I'm sorry, but you won't be able to do this. But it's really good for any on-prem or someone else who might be a private cloud, things like that. We're going to run the actual report. I picked customer statements because that's the one that we were adjusting. I'm going to put in a date range of data I know exists in the system. I'm going to do any parameters or filters. Now here you got to pick your report style. So we Standard copy test is the one that I was doing that had my new report data definition on it. And you want to archive it. That's how you get your GUID, and it will stay around. So based on what you pick, let me pause there for a second. Based on what you pick, it could be a day, a month, a week. That's how long you can use that GUID for testing. So if you think you're going to be developing this report for like a month, and you're not going to make any more changes than you already have to your report data definition, you could put it in there for a month. You don't want to put all of your things on archive because there's a whole SQL reporting database that will fill up with tables from reports being printed. So it's really more for just testing and archiving reports. But the next thing I'm showing you here is routing. Make sure if you are testing any reports that have a checkbox here for routing, that means you have a advanced print routing attached to this customer statements report, which means even if you do print preview, it will send out all those emails. You do not want to do that while you are testing. You do not want to send out a bunch of customer statements that maybe aren't ready or maybe wrong, something that you need to fix. So make sure you uncheck that routing before you click on anything to print preview to test it to generate a GUID. People will be mad at you if you do not uncheck that. And then you click print preview and it'll say report submitted just like that, which is excellent. Okay, so now we are going to go, I don't think it's on this video, I think it's on the next slide. Okay, now you're going to go and find your GUID. So you just ran your report. Hopefully everything worked. Even if it doesn't, I'll show you where that goes. So we're going to play this. Under this notifications, there's a button that says system monitor. And in your system monitor, it'll tell you all about your reports. So it'll have active tasks if it's still running. It'll have history tasks. If it ran and it either completed or it aired out, it'll be in history. If nothing's running, it'll be in scheduled tasks, and perhaps your task agent isn't turned on. And that's another issue too. So contact your IT person. But once it runs and it's done and it was not aired, it'll show up in this reports area. And these are all highlighted because you can click on this and get that report to pop up if it didn't pop up in the right place or you need to pull it up again. But let me put playback on. Mine went through and it was fine. There was no errors. So I'm going to show you where the GUID is. First of all, you want to make sure you're using your most recent one. So I usually sort by when I ran it. It should, if you archived it by day, month, week, whatever, it'll show up archived. It right next to it, it'll also show you when it will expire. So that purge date, let me pull that back a little bit. Hold on, it went really fast. We're going to stop at that archive. Okay, there we go. So purge date right here, we said 1 day. So you can see it expires on 10/7/2025. That's important because if you have a default GUID on a report and it expires, you will get an error. We will talk about that later more, but that purge date is important. Okay, so now we're going to go to file name, and under file name, you will find your GUID. That is this crazy set of letters and numbers. You want to copy that and keep it for testing for as long as you need to test it for. And then I'm going to show you where you use it. Okay, so you want to find your report in the SSRS portal. And if you don't know about your SSRS portal, maybe a discussion for another day, but you want to find it. It should be in custom reports in that report style. It'll show you your pathway, how to get there. So this one's under custom reports, and then I believe it's like customer statement, and then specifically the form we're going to use here is custate. And if it's a different report, it'll say in that report pathway for your report style. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go edit in report builder. I was trying to pull it down, but it just says, do you want to open report builder? Because it's a piece of software. And you say, yes, it's best to do it from this portal so that you get exactly the version of report builder that fits to your SQL. So if you've never downloaded report builder before, try and do it from the portal because you have to have the version of SQL that meets the version of SQL that your Epicor is using. Okay, so we're editing this report specifically. This is the customer statement report that our new RDD is pulling from. Okay, so if you can see here, the only parameter on this report is that table GUID. So that contains all of our filter parameters in that. And see, we put that GUID in and we can run it out of this file itself, which makes testing a lot easier. Now you can go to parameter properties, you can put in a default value and you can specify it right here so that every time you go to run, it just automatically pops up. Now, even if people are using this report the GUID, as long as it's not expired, will not affect their ability to run the report. Because they're using it without a default. They don't need a default. They're putting through a specific GUID when they're running the report. The only time it'll start to error for them is if that GUID that you put in is expired. And it's an error that everybody's like, well, what is happening here? I'm not really sure. All of a sudden it says I have no data or my data is wrong. So available values have to be valid. They can't be expired or invalid. So when that default is invalid, it's just going to say, hey, we got a problem here. Help us. Okay, so now we're going to talk about adding that new field that we add to the RDD to the RDL itself, and it has to happen in 3 places. So it has to happen in the query expression, in the query fields, and the report itself. So we're going to go through that right now. Okay, let's talk about the first place, the query expression. That's going to be in your data set expression, and I will show you that in this video. So you have different data sets. There's company, there's customer, invoice head. We added our field to company. So in this case, we want to go to this company data set. So you can see, just like SQL, it's written as a SQL statement, essentially, with a couple little caveats here and there. So we want to say, oh, our company table is T1, so we want to add our new field address 1, just like we would on a usual SQL statement. And then you want to run it after to make sure that you didn't mess up, add a period where you shouldn't have added a period, if you spell address wrong, it'll get mad. Everything has to be exactly the way it is in that RDD, exactly as it is in SQL, exactly what the value of that field is named. So if you had spelled it wrong, it would have given you an error. So that's the first place. The second place that we're going to add it is in the query field. So now that we have it in the query expression itself, we have to add it to the query field. So you can see right now that address 1 does not exist here. There is a calc address. That's a different situation. It's like a string that they put in, but that address 1 does not exist right now. So we're going to add it. Yeah, I'm showing you it doesn't exist. So we go into dataset properties, and now instead of going to the query expression, we go to fields. We're going to go add. You're always going to want to use query field, not calculated field. Calculated field is if you have like 2 other fields and you want to do some sort of expression to make a 3rd field, you can use a calculated field. But anything that's coming directly from the query is going to be a query field. Field source needs to be the same name as whatever it's named in the query, but you can change field name to whatever you want it to be. So now you can see that address first is in there, and then you want to test to make sure that you didn't, once again, spell anything wrong, put a space where you shouldn't have a weird period, any of that kind of stuff. That's why this GUID testing is really good. Once again, you'd have to do all these same steps except for the GUID testing if you were on cloud. We're going to add to the 3rd place, which is the actual report. Yay. So now that we have our fields, we're going to have to put it on the report itself. So this one's company. I know that company can be put in the header, but headers, you need to have their aggregates. So it's likely that we're going to have to use a first or a sum or some element of that in a header. Okay, so we put our query field in, and we're just going to label it address 1. So we know what it is, and let's test it. And yay, okay. We have our address. It's the same as the address that is over to the left, but we pulled it through ourselves because we're so smart and awesome and good. And we're going to make that text box a little bigger so that it all fits on one line. All right, so that's just adding a simple standard field in the simplest way as possible. Okay, now let's talk about adding a table, which is a little bit more in depth, but after you add the table, you'll have to add fields in the same way that we just did it. But let's talk about the more complex adding a table. It involves first checking rows before you add a table. Adding a table can create duplications in data. It can create losing data. It can create more issues because you're linking a whole nother table. So you might want to check the rows before adding a table, and I'm going to show you how to do that through your GUID. Once again, if you're on cloud, you're not going to be able to do that. You could, no, because there's going to be stuff you can't access in BAQs. Okay, so we're going to talk about adding a table to the RDD. We're going to talk about how you have to, all the fields that you need to join need to be unexcluded from both the tables. You can't join the same child table 2 times to different other tables. That's something that's important. You can do that in SQL and just alias the table. You can do that in BAQs and alias the table. You cannot do that in RDDs. It's really stinky, but it's what happens. So you can also, every time you change an RDD, you need a new GUID if you're testing with a GUID. So just keep that in mind. If there's even just as simple as an unexcluded field, you need to have a new GUID for that. And then we're going to talk about how to add the table join to the RDL in those 3 places that we discussed before. Before adding a table, you're going to want to check the output. Now, I'm going to show you how to do that. So we have, okay, so we have our GUID already, and we've already saved it. But we're going to go and we're going to see our expression, and we're going to go ahead and we're just going to copy the entire expression from this one's invoice head, customer invoice head. And then we're going to go into our SQL after we have that. And we are going to go to, if you can see this, we have our prod database, our stored proc database, and then we have demo reports, which should come with every SQL. There should be a reports database. You don't want to be in your prod, you want to be in your reports, because in your reports database, there's temporary tables that are created based on that GUID. So this is where you can test any of those SQL statements that are connected to a canned report. So in this case, we have our SQL statement and we have our GUID. So let's test our output. So we're going to pull our GUID now, and all of these places where it has a quote to plus parameters, table GUID, valid, plus, and then another quote, we're going to replace all of those with our GUID. So what that's doing is saying, hey, leave this little string in here waiting for that GUID to come in, and then run that report with that GUID. We can run it directly with that, but we need to take off anything that makes it a string. So we're going to take those off. And now we can just execute and we'll get data. And you'll see if you look through the tables in this demo reports, so the reporting database for your Epicor instance, you will see these tables that exist. So cache detail will be a table with that GUID behind it, and report labels will be a table with that GUID behind it. You better have a good thing that cleans up that reports database, otherwise over time your Epicor is going to get really slow. So this is the specific output for this report. There are 16 lines of data for that specific table. And if there is no filters on the table that is using this data, then you're going to get 16 lines of data in your report. There might be groupings, there might be filters at the table level, but in terms of output, this is 16 lines of data from this specific query expression. You want to make sure there's still 16 after you add a table. We're going to add the country table to our RDD. And sometimes people enjoy adding the country table because you can have like ISO codes that might be there based on the country num. There could be tax region codes. There's all sorts of things in this country table that perhaps you want ISO, like origin country, things like that, that you wanted formatted a specific way for perhaps custom forms or other such things that you may need to change based on what company you're using. So we're going to go ahead and add that country table to the company table. Okay, so let's talk about adding that table to the RDD. We're going to go back to data sources. We're going to make sure first that table doesn't already exist. It might already exist. And there are linked tables as well. That's maybe a subject for another day, but you can also check down here, linked tables, to see if the table you want and the field you want already exists in that. We're going to first, from the company table, unexclude any of the fields that we need in order to join our country table. So we need country num and we need our company ID. So that's what we did first, is unexclude those from our company table. And then we're going to add our second table after we do that. So any of our linked fields, any fields we need for our relationship, our join, we need to unexclude from the parent table. Okay, we're checking if country exists in there. I don't think I spelled it right, but I think I did. Okay, good. It didn't, so we're going to pull country table. These are all the tables you have access to. You have access to a lot of tables to add. And as long as you have the fields to link, you can link them. Okay, so we're adding country table in. Try and put it whatever sequence you want. And there is a criteria for the table if you need to add criteria for that table. Once again, we can talk about that another day, because there's all sorts of things you can do. We're saving. Everything's slow today, so this takes a little bit of time. It should save. Once it saves, you'll see your exclusions pop up, and that's all the fields from the table. Now, they'll all come in excluded. That's good. We don't want to have a million columns every time we add a table, so they do that on purpose. Now, I just unexcluded the join fields that I needed, which was company and country num, so that I can make that relationship join. They will not show up in the relationship join until you make sure they're unexcluded. Can't join on anything that it can't see, and it can't see it until you unexclude it. Okay, so now that we have that, and save after each move so that we don't lose the progress we made. Now we're going to add our relationships. We go to relationships, and there's already 2 canned relationships. We're going to add a third here. We're going company to country. Okay, you need to add a relationship ID. You need to add a description. You're going to add in the parent table. Parent table is the one that already exists in some sort of relation. And then you're going to add the child, which is the new one we just added, country. Definition only is going to be an inner join, and an output is an outer join, left outer join. Okay, we're going to save that. And now we're going to go into our relationship after it stops. All right, so now we're going to go into our relationship and we have to add those join fields. Otherwise, it won't know what to join on. So you have to add one at a time. We're going to put in our first relationship, which is going to be our parent field, and our child field on company, parent being a company and child being country. And then we're going to add our second, which is thinking again. Our second is going to be country num and country num. So parent, once again, is going to be company and child is going to be country. We're going to add our country num to country num. Beautiful. So we save that. We had already unexcluded field on this one, but if you wanted, I'd say before you run your GUID, any fields you want from this country table, make sure they're unexcluded so you don't have to run multiple GUIDs for testing. I think on this one, I'm just going to put in country number. I think I don't go through the fields because we already did that. Save time. Make sure that's all saved. Now, make sure you go and get a new GUID. So do that process we already discussed and run the report again so that you can use your new GUID in testing. Yeah, I would check also, I'd use that SQL statement. I'd go back to SQL, put in that new GUID and make sure that there isn't additional rows where you don't want additional rows, or if you lost rows by just making a join. Also, if there's any odd output, you may have to make alterations to the join. Perhaps you didn't put enough criteria. Maybe there needs to be 3 join fields, 4 join fields. I don't know. There may be duplications in your output. So just make sure that output looks good as long as you're not on Epicor Cloud, because you can't do that. Okay, so now we're going to add that table to the SSRS report. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So we're going to go back to our company data set, and we're going to go back to that expression like we did before. Before we just added a field, now we're going to add a join. So right after that table, and before the quotes, you want to put what your join is. In this case, it's a left outer join, the name of the table, an underscore, and then from quote to quote, you just want to copy that and add that to your table. I already aliased it T2, so that was there for me. You just want to copy and paste that right after the underscore. And you're going to put your on, because you want to know what you're joining on as well in this statement. So you're going to say T1, which is company here, T1 company field, T2 company field. So just the exact same join that you did within the RDD. T1 country num equals T2 country num. You can also add a where clause here if you need to. All right, and then we're going to run to make sure we wrote everything correctly, didn't forget an equals, didn't put a subtract instead of an equals, and everything looks good. So now to add the fields for that, you'd have to go back and watch all of those things about how to add the fields to the query expression, to the query field, and then to the report itself, the same way we did before. Now that we have the table in it, we can do the same steps. Okay, so now a note about cleanup. After you're done updating your report, you want to remove all the default GUIDs from the RDLs when you're done. Make sure to do that every single time, because once they expire, the report will throw an error, regardless if they're using the default or not. And they'll never really be using the default. They'll always be running it clean. So it will confuse you and them once it expires. So default values need to be valid.